Continuing with my series, No Questions Asked, here is a new episode, Three Black Swans. In response to viewer demand, I'm providing more coverage of my cat. He may not ask any questions, since he already knows all the answers, but he's willing to grace this channel with his presence. And so, let's talk about some black swans, three of them. One of the countries that's currently breeding black swans is Japan. There is a good chance that Japan will play an important role in crashing the world economy. It seems likely to trigger a new episode within the cycle of global financial crises. Japan is the country with the highest debt to GDP ratio, 230%. Conventional economic thinking is that anything over 100% is the kiss of death. But death is sometimes slow in coming, taxing our patience. The solvency of the Japanese government depends on the low interest rate set by Japan's central bank. It keeps the interest payments on Japanese debt from swallowing up the government's entire budget. Japan has bucked the global trends of increasing and decreasing interest rates for a long time now. This made Japan the home of the carry trade. Speculators borrow cheaply in Japan and then invest at a higher interest rate elsewhere. Because of some magical mystical phenomenon, global inflation has hardly touched Japan. But in spite of low inflation, the yen has been substantially devalued. This weird state of affairs, called Abenomics, has kept Japan afloat. Abenomics is just good old quantitative easing, Federal Reserve style, with the financial stimulation being provided using the left hand rather than the right hand. However, all bad things must come to an end eventually, and in 2025 inflation in Japan reached 3%. This would be considered insignificant in most countries. In Turkey, for instance, inflation is around 30%, down from 80%. But even 3% is a big number for Japan. The interest rate set by the Japanese central bank is just 0.5%. Central banks like to keep their interest rates above inflation in order to control it. But here we have inflation 6 times higher than the interest rate. This is enough to make most central bankers run around with their hair on fire. Even in Japan, where next week Japan's central bank will raise its interest rate, it will raise it all the way up to 0.75%, perhaps even higher. The backdrop for this move does not seem auspicious for interest rate increases. Japan's GDP is falling. The Japanese economy is definitely not overheating. The higher interest rate will most likely cause the yen to strengthen. This is definitely not what Japan needs, since a stronger yen will hurt Japan's exports. It may not seem like such a great deal, but what is important is the context. Japan's engine of growth and capital formation has stalled. At the same time, financial markets are growing out of control. Huge bubbles have formed in crypto, AI, and other speculative garbage. It is this combination of ingredients that has fed the black swan. Nobody can tell when exactly it will take flight, but it is getting ready. The interest rate increase by Japan's central bank will wreck the carry trade. Money will drain out of the financial markets. Some of it will flood into Japan, driving up inflation some more, giving rise to a vicious cycle. Meanwhile, Black Swan number 2 is starting to flap its wings in Europe. The US Federal Reserve has stopped supporting the European Central Bank using currency swaps. As a result, a liquidity crisis is forming in Europe. The draining of liquidity will trigger a new debt crisis in certain well-known countries. The European Commission is doing what it can to make this crisis worse. It has decided to permanently block Russian assets held at Euroclear in Belgium. The plan is to abscond with these assets and to feed them into the Ukrainian black hole. This would allow the EU to perpetuate the fiction that NATO hasn't yet lost the war to Russia. But this plan is causing the Belgian Prime Minister and the head of Euroclear to break out in cold sweat. The problem is that these Russian assets cannot even be stolen because they don't actually exist. These assets consist of Europe's debt to Russia. The Europeans have already spent the money which Russia has paid them. Also, this debt is subject to various conditions. Its mishandling is sure to affect European ratings. It is also bound to trigger a series of lawsuits. The first of these has already been filed with a court in Moscow. There is no shortage of European assets in Russia for this court to confiscate. The attempt to take this debt out of Euroclear and to exchange it for money will zero out its value. Meanwhile, the ratings of European bonds will fall and interest rates on them will go up. The only possible buyer for these stolen goods is the European Central Bank. The ECB would have to emit a corresponding quantity of euros, but the ECB head, Christine Lagarde, has already said no to the euro commissars. She had an ironclad reason for her answer. There is no longer an automatic dollar-euro currency swap in effect, and unsupported euro emission would simply dilute the value of the euro. As if two black swans weren't enough, there is also black swan number 3 ready to take flight. Over in the US, Trump's MAGA initiative hasn't gone anywhere, and time is running out. I don't much like the acronym MAGA. I prefer the acronym MASAL. It stands for Make America Suck a Little Less. It seems much more realistic. In any case, the only way to kickstart MAGA now would be to cause the financial markets to tank. This could, in theory, cause money to pour into the real economy of goods and services. Meanwhile, the US dollar's share of global currency reserves is about to drop below 50%. The US dollar is no longer the reserve currency of choice. The share of the US dollar in international oil futures is already less than half. The petrodollar, which supported the ability of the US to print money, is gone. Consequently, the US dollar is finding less and less use as a medium of exchange in international trade. It is splitting into an internal currency and an external currency. The internal currency is going to inflate, and the external currency is going to crash. The US will find itself unable to participate in world trade to the usual extent, and it will be forced into economic isolation and autarky. Meanwhile, lots of fools are still hyping AI and talking up NVIDIA stock. But there is lots of hard data showing that investments in AI are simply not effective. Worse than that, AI is rapidly turning lots of people into idiots. People who use AI soon find themselves unable to function without AI. At the same time, AI systems cannot be prevented from making mistakes. Recent studies indicate that AI systems can have error rates ranging from 45 to over 70%. Meanwhile, the cost of AI technology and the electricity it is soaking up are increasing. But these costs are not supported by any payback. AI is a disaster in the making. The AI bubble seems ready to pop at any time. 3 black swans are ready to take flight in Japan, in Europe, and in the US. But that is not all. There are also some black swan eggs that seem ready to hatch. The US shale oil is on a plateau and production will inevitably head down. The US will be forced to once again ramp up its oil imports. But there isn't enough spare capacity in the world to make up for any large drop in US shale oil. The US will be forced to strike a balance between a shortage of energy and a shortage of money. The US is desperately trying to steal Venezuela's oil, even to the point of hijacking oil tankers. The attempt at regime change in Venezuela could well turn into a massive embarrassment for the US military. And the US military-industrial complex is yet to process the fact that it has lost the arms race to Russia. You may not know what to do with all of this information, but luckily my cat does. He's going to sleep on it, and then he'll go to the kitchen and eat some cat food, and then go to the bathroom and scratch around in the litter box. By then, it will be time for his next nap.